I don't know of any cliffs nearby, but you might want to hurl me when you're done. That's always an option. I also want you to know that I actually sent an email to what I thought was Pleasant Hill with a modern lesson and a different sermon title. But apparently Martha didn't get it. So I want to at least give you a little bit of background here about what the modern lesson was, because I probably will refer to it, and you're going to go, what? It was a poem by Mary Oliver, and it was a poem about the words that the Buddha spoke as his very last words. And of all the things that he could have said, she said, I didn't bring a copy of the poem with me, and I can't quote it to you, but she says, of all the things, when he looked about upon this world and he saw everything and everything he had experienced, of all the things he could have said, what he said was, make yourself a light. And died. So remember that if I refer to the Buddha. So when I was a teenager living in South Texas, I had a way of trying to manipulate my parents. I know that shocks you. When I wanted to go with my friends to the beach at South Padre Island, which was only about 20 miles away, I would ask my parents, can I go to Mexico or maybe to the beach? Matamoros, Mexico was about 30 miles away. Now that I'm a parent, I'm sure that my parents were quite aware of my attempt at a manipulation by giving them this particular either-or choice rather than the general option of no, but they mostly played along. And I made a fair number of trips to the beach with my friends, with my parents' knowledge, and a few to Mexico, which may or may not have had parental approval. Scandal. Do you know what scandal is defined by? Scandal is that which is an occurrence in which people are shocked. And I know you're shocked, right? And particularity is just a small detail. One that nobody asked me about before I was ordained, you know. The scandal of particularity is a shocking detail. So let's talk about details. The first is that in the midst of all of our benevolent understanding of God and God's mercy and steadfast love and justice for all, God plays favorites. Out of surely many possibilities, God chose Abram. God blessed Abram. God made a promise to Abram, and God fulfilled that promise. God chose one particular man to be blessed beyond measure, and through him, God chose a whole people. God did not open the gates for everyone. God chose a particular man and a particular people to bless and to bring about the purposes of God. And these people grew to know that they worshiped the one true God. They practiced Torah, and through the law they lived before God. Everyone else had it wrong. That is what we might call the Old Testament understanding of the scandal of particularity. The next detail is God can change God's mind. From the midst of God's own people, God raised up Jesus, one who began to break down barriers and eventually came to proclaim that God's favor wasn't just for the Jews. Through Jesus, God's love and mercy were for all people who believed in him, whether or not they practiced Torah. At least one gospel writer then proclaimed that God had made a new rule. No one comes to the Father except through Jesus. That's what we might call the New Testament understanding of the scandal of particularity. But there's at least one more detail to consider. The scandal of particularity, that shocking detail about God, is not that some are left behind or some are left out of the loop or some are pushed aside while others are elevated and favored. It's not about whether you believe Jesus is the only way to God or Torah obedience is true righteousness. The scandal of particularity, the shocking detail, is that the one chosen by God, the one man, the one woman, the one family, the one nation, the one chosen by God is in for one scandalous ride. If the scriptures are true in any way, the one chosen might be called to sacrifice a son, be hoodwinked by a wife, manipulated by a father-in-law, sold into slavery and wander in the desert for 40 years. The one chosen by God might be called to lead armies or harbor enemies of the state. The one chosen by God might be called to get pregnant out of wedlock. The one chosen might be asked to leave home and family and livelihood, or the one chosen might be asked to carry a cross and die so that others might live. Which leads us to the real detail to consider. The real scandal of particularity, the real shocking detail about God is that God is particularly scandalous. And if you have any brains at all, you'd run from God like Jonah, or squirm like Jeremiah and every other prophet of note, begging, please God, not me, I'm only a boy, I'm only a shepherd, I'm not good enough. Fear, anxiety, resistance, inadequacy, even resentment are understandable reactions to being called by God. For our God does not just call people to be warm and fuzzy, but this scandalous God that refuses, despite our best efforts, to be domesticated, may call people to pluck up and pull down, to destroy and overthrow before they are ever to build and plant. Oh, we can hear those words from Jeremiah and nod knowingly. When we're on the inside, when we feel like we are chosen for great things by the great and only God worthy of our devotions, we gleefully accept the challenge of plucking and pulling down the world's false gods, don't we? We forget that the prophets of old were rarely sent by God to speak to the other or the outsider, and almost always were commissioned to speak pointedly to the people of God. You, they said, you, the chosen of God, you are the ones with false gods. No wonder God's prophets were beaten and chased and led to cliff's edges to be hurled into the abyss. We humans, chosen or not, are a little twitchy about our personal gods. We all have them. Do you know what yours are? Those unassailable truths that you hold to be self-evident? Could you imagine God asking you to rethink what you've always believed was right? Are you feeling resistance to the idea? Perhaps if you are glimpsing what it must have felt like to be a faithful, Torah-obedient Jew and hear Jesus say that the scriptures had been fulfilled in him, or to hear Jeremiah speak judgment against Israel. To trust that God is still God, even when everything you know is turned upside down, is gut-wrenching, disorienting, and disabling, and that's what the called by God do. That's why it's a scandalous ride. They disorient and disable our thinking because that's where things begin to change. That's where God begins to work. that's where there's a chance for reorientation. We need a prophet or two, don't you think? Because the world needs reorientation. Dare I say that the world is in a sorry state? And that we're all grasping and clinging to old ideas and worn out methods, hoping and praying that something new will happen if we just work a little harder or do a little more or yell a little louder. We can't let go. Even those of us who are good progressives, we can't let go of what we just know has to work and has to be. As Richard Rohr says, we're addicted to our own thinking. We're afraid if we let go, we'll be adrift, rudderless, powerless, which of course is why God so often says, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you." And in our powerlessness, we might actually find that that is true, that God is with us. Denise Levertov, the poet, said it this way: "As swimmers dare to lie face to the sky, and water bears them, as hawks rest upon air, and air sustains them, so would I learn to attain free fall and float into Creator's Spirit's deep embrace, knowing no effort earns that all-surrounding grace." Could we learn to trust that God, in God's grace, might actually do far more than we could ask or imagine? Could there be with God a way through this mess that we've created? Or in keeping with our children's time, would we eat green eggs and ham with our God if God offered them? Or would we scream, "I do not like green eggs and ham, not with you, God, not with a cod, not with a prophet, not with a moppet. I will not eat green eggs and ham, Sam I am." Don't you like that? Sam I am? I am who is? Oh, never mind. I'm getting off. Okay, so that's a little scandalous. I know it. But there's a prophet somewhere. A prophet of God saying, "Don't be afraid. God is doing a new thing. Try it. You might like it. Try something scandalous. Try something that takes your breath away, something that disorients and disables what you think you know so you can learn what you need to know." Here's a scandalous suggestion. Write a letter of love and hope to Donald Trump. Or if you're on the other side, to Hillary Clinton. You don't have to believe in their rhetoric. You don't have to agree with the rhetoric. You just have to break out of the box with one shocking detail that announces your yes to God's invitation for one scandalous ride. Yes, God, I will love my enemy. Say yes to a scandalous God that wants to do a new thing. Make yourself a light, as the Buddha and Jesus said. A light that God can use to illuminate the shadows, to fill the tenebrous depths, to open a path that we can't see because we're so afraid of this particularly scandalous God and what this scandalous God might do and what this God might require of us. We're always trying to manipulate God the way I tried to manipulate my parents as a teenager. This or that, God. You choose, then I'll follow. Surely God must laugh at our naivete, and surely God must weep over our reluctance to let go of either the beach or the border and embrace a new adventure of God's own choosing. And yet, God still calls. Would you? Could you? One man, one woman, one family, one nation, God still calls and invites us to take a scandalous ride. You could be the one. Thanks be to God.